Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a very big pleasure for me. I'm here, as Lydia said. Thank you for welcoming us, Lydia. Sorry about that. It was a bit rude. Anyway, Adrian is a British fantasy and sci-fi writer, and you're known for a variety of work. We're going to talk about Children of Time. I brought a book because I was like, yes, the chance. Final Architecture, you did Dogs of War, Tyrant Philosophers, and Shadows of the App series, right? So, you won a bunch of awards. So it's award-winning sci-fi author. You won the Arthur C. Clarke and the BSFA, and British Fantasy, British Science Fiction, and Sidewise Awards. So that's a lot. So please, big round of applause for Adrian Tchaikovsky. All right, so thank you for joining us. That's the first one. Welcome. I thought we could start with an icebreaker question, which is, I imagine you don't get a lot of invites for, AI conferences very often. So what did you think and what did you expect? Or what were you thinking when you got an email from us, from our program coordinator, Lily, in your inbox?
So when I'd actually read the content of the email, it was very much sort of me, really. I was just commenting, the award-winning author Adrian Tchaikovsky still sounds extremely weird. I am one of those, I still very much think of myself as the new guy in the genre, despite the fact that I've got 50 books out and have been going for 15 years. So the idea that people might want to have me speak on anything kind of serious was a bit bewildering. I was going to say, when I saw the email and before I read the content, it was just sort of, oh, what's this? Because you would not believe the number of AI-related services people have been trying to interest me in films, books, editing, publishing, marketing, all manner of stuff, none of which I've been particularly keen on taking up. But
So thank you so much for taking this up, because there's a reason why we wanted to invite you, and it's related to the Children of Time series that I've already mentioned. I brought the third book because when you released this third book and then ChatGPT came out, I imagine a lot of analogies were happening, and you got a lot of people asking this. I saw on some podcasts that you were asked questions about this and everything. So there's two, for anyone, I don't know if anyone has read the book, but there's two people. I'm on the screen, I scared myself. So there's two characters in the book that they have been compared. So it's Gothi and Getley, I think I'm getting the names correctly, and they're been compared to what ChatGPT is. So my first part of the question is, have you tried ChatGPT, and does it seem similar to what you envision talking to Gothi and Getley is?
Yeah, this turned out to be inadvertent marketing gold, because when I was writing the books, no one had heard of ChatGPT. You have like a 2-year cycle generally of sort of writing to submission to actually getting published. And when it came out, that was the topic of the day. And yet, so I've not dabbled much myself. I've certainly seen a lot of ChatGPT generated kind of dialogue and conversation, and it is weirdly uncanny. And the point of the characters in the book is they're birds, and it is not clear how much they are literally parroting and how much they are thinking, because a lot of what they say is quite abstruse, and a lot of what they say does seem to apply to what's going on, but not necessarily in a very straightforward way. And that is the feel you get from ChatGPT. You get this, is there something there? Because we as human beings are very primed to accept that there is something there. If people know of the very early ELIZA sort of therapy, automated therapist experiments, people will latch on to anything that seems vaguely human. We personify things because that's the way our brain is set up. But at the same time, it's just that weird, I think it's the first time I'd encountered the uncanny valley in text form. Because you just get this, that's not quite a response, and that's just like, it's a bit like talking to someone who may be going through really quite a weird trip.
That's what we all feel when we talk to ChatGPT. It's okay. ChatGPT is just very excited about everything. So I was rereading the book, and I wanted to choose a quote. So I tried to pick a quote that it goes to the point that I want to make, but also doesn't spoil too much from the book. So there's this character that is looking at these two birds, and it's about thinking about these two birds. So apologies for butchering your words, but I'll read it out. So she had always believed that intelligence was the galaxy's great jewel, and its shine would be unmistakable wherever you found it. Alien or earthborn or artificial, there would come a moment when your perspective flipped and you recognized the eye across from you. And yet, here were these birds who could perform all manner of complicated tricks, but she could meet the gaze of Gethly and Gothy and see only her own reflection. So, a very focal point of Children of Time and the entire series is the anthropocentric ideas of the human characters, and I guess the human reader as well, where intelligence is based off of what they perceive as human intelligence, and dismiss other types of intelligence a lot of the times, especially early on. Apologies for slight spoilers. So we can draw a parallel to what we see right now as well with machines, which is there just a different sort of intelligence that we don't recognize because A, we built it, and B, doesn't look like what we would think and perceive as intelligence?
So one of the ideas that fascinated me is the idea of emergent AI, which is that it's potentially an intelligence that we have built, but we haven't built it to be intelligent. It's just the idea that if you have a complicated enough network, and I think this is something that neural nets are banking on to a certain extent. You have a complicated enough network, you get to that point where genuine sapience is kind of enkindled just by the amount of the number of interactions. Because obviously, in our brains are a lot of neurons, and the neurons are doing very complicated stuff, and our intelligence has emerged out of this. I mean, my personal view is that some level of sapience and awareness emerges very early on, and then becomes more complicated as the neural equipment group becomes more complicated. The weird thing is, if that has happened, it's probably not what we're thinking of at the moment as sort of, the generative AI models. But they are very good at simulating it. So you've got this weird. This is the thing that turns up in Neuromancer. If people know the Gibson novel, which I've got to say remains for me one of the great science fiction novels of all time. It's the idea you have two AIs that work in these two different cognitive levels, and there's one that is a linguistic AI and one that is kind of almost like an imaginative AI. And it's when they come together you get that enormous sort of godlike AI is created. And I kind of wonder, maybe that somewhere in the world there is a genuine AI that we just don't know about. I mean, it's one of the things that people used to talk about way back in the day was the idea that the US phone network was sufficiently complicated that it was kind of like a human brain, which I suspect probably wasn't the case, but it's a good kind of sort of thought experiment. And certainly, if one thing, the idea that maybe the whole internet is sapient and that sort of thing has certainly been kicked around a lot. And then arguably a really interesting use case of generative AI would be acting as the mouthpiece to something like that was fully sapient on this very weird machine level, but wouldn't otherwise have any way of communicating with humans.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So that's gone complete. I do this with questions. I have answered not the question you actually asked me, but this is kind of how I work in interviews. Sorry.
I mean, that's perfectly fine. But I'll go back to the point. I just want to mention, I forgot to mention, there's going to be a Slido, so we're going to have time for a couple of questions, hopefully. I don't know what the is there like a code that I need to give people? I guess. Oh, it'll come up on the screen. Yeah. So we're going to go through a few more questions, but I forgot to mention this earlier on, so apologies. But there will be some time, hopefully, that you guys can ask questions to Adrian. So I do understand that. I lost my train of thought because I was like, no, I need to ask about Slido. What is your perspective on these AIs right now, though? What do you think? You as Adrian, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel generative models, ChatGPT and that kind of thing, I don't, although the label AI gets applied to them, and I understand in a very broad definition, they kind of fall within that circle of the Venn diagram, I don't think there's any I. The way that they work is I mean, we kind of need a better name for it in this day and age, but if I use I think people know what I mean when I say the Chinese room sort of idea. And that's kind of what's going on. There's nothing in that model that is actually interpreting the information by way of meaning. And this is why you get some really quite disastrous. I mean, someone released an AI guide to edible fungus, and that sort of thing is going to get people killed because there's no kind of level of there's no meaning assessment going on there. It's just producing something that looks like a fungus guide. The actual details, as long as they conform within that general set, aren't important as far as the model is concerned. I mean, there have been some objectively hilarious cookbooks involving ingredients that literally don't exist or make any kind of rational sense, but they just look on the page, yeah, that looks like a recipe. And one of the big things about, so when science fiction writers envisage AI, basically the best example I can think of is Commander Data from Star Trek, which I imagine is something that most people are familiar with, is very concerned with basically objective truth and accuracy, but very, very bad at vibe. And ChatGPT is all vibe. It will absolutely give you the general feel of a thing, very, very successfully. And the technology involved in just getting to that point is truly remarkable, but there's no I, because there's no ability to pass the stuff it's producing for any kind of objective truth. And it's, from what I understand, and you know, that's I suspect I'm probably one of the least informed people in the room on this basis, but from what I understand, that's kind of an inherent way that the model works. And I was reading an article that someone had written, I think just today, talking about the idea, well, it'll be fine, it just needs to not just answer the question, but research the question. But as it has no way of assessing whatever it's researching, and especially as more and more AI-generated inaccurate stuff is out there for it to research from, I don't see that is the answer. You need something that is capable of that human level of data processing for meaning, for accuracy, which requires a colossal amount of kind of contextual analysis that isn't present in a generative model.
Okay, so you have written, especially in Children of Time, there are some AI characters. So you think there is still quite a big gap between, for example, Kern and the AIs that we have, or the A's that we have now?
Yes, I mean, but I think I think gap is probably not the right word. I think gap is misleading, because gap is suggesting, well, we just need to go further.
Yeah.
And I think that you actually need a different direction entirely. And I know, I mean, I'm absolutely sure there are people who are working on this at the moment from very different perspectives. And like I say, I think the generative models we've got could well be enormously useful tools to bridge a gap. I mean, it's something there's an AI entity in my book, Firewalkers, which was basically the combination of essentially an Alexa-style chatbot for the human-facing end and a neural net sort of problem-solving engine together make that kind of human-level interaction. So arguably what we've done, we've invented a very useful organ for, to sound a little messianic, the AI that shall come after it.
So when we sent out the invite last year, we already had some questions. By we, I mean mostly I had a lot of questions. But one of them that I had envisioned, you kind of ruined it for us a little bit later because you made an announcement. But basically, we wanted to ask, given all of the thought experiments of these books, you know, you had intelligence in spiders and octopus, and we can see there's a question about it, and corvids. But the AI was always a tool or a side character or an NPC almost in the books, right? So I was going to ask you, what about exploring the thought experiment from the perspective of an AI? And then you announced a book. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that book?
Yes, so this June I will be bringing out, Tor.com will be bringing out a book called Service Model. Service Model is about a robot valet called Charles, who inadvertently murders his employer and then ends up going on the run in a world which is absolutely kind of collapsing from for a variety of reasons. My kind of elevator pitch is it's Mad Max starring C-3PO. Or if you're a fan of Dune, it's putting the butler into Butlerian Jihad. And it's kind of a comedy, but it's a comedy because I genuinely resort to comedy when the subject matter is really very bleak, because that makes it a lot more digestible to read. And yes, so the main character is a robot servant, and despite various other characters' attempts, absolutely resists any suggestion that it is in any way a sapient, self-aware, self-motivated entity, and is just basically trying to do its job as a valet in a world which is entering full-on Mad Max levels of post-apocalyptic collapse.
That's not bleak. Did you prepare something for us today?
Yes, so if you'll permit me, I think this is actually going to be the very first reading from this book. So
I kept that secret well. I don't know how, but I did.
So there's a little section from the beginning, shortly after the unfortunate event, shall we say. For a while, as the day crept steadily on and all the tasks he could not do turned from due to outstanding in his head, he vacillated. He attempted to skip his first task and come back to it. He would lay out Master's travel clothes for the travelling that Master would not be doing. It didn't matter that Master wouldn't be travelling on account of being dead. There was no observable difference between that and Master not travelling because he didn't want to travel, except for Master being dead. And really, Master did so little when alive that being dead should barely make a ripple in his schedule. The subroutine lurked coyly at the edge of Charles's functioning while he placed the previous day's unworn clothes back in the wardrobe, but then reared up, tutting when he tried to retrieve fresh clothes that Master would not wear for the coming day. Master was dead. This task could not now be reasonably completed. The Schrodinger's cat that was Master's requirement or non-requirement for travelling clothes had finally been irreversibly determined. The box had been opened and upended, and only a dead cat had slid stiffly out. Charles stood in front of the wardrobe that was full of identical suits of clothes that would never be worn and attempted to understand the difference between this and the previous day's state of affairs. The clothes were just as destined to go unworn, yet now everything was different. He could put things away, clear things up, but not set out anything new. And yet his mind, or at least the sequence of actions that constituted his nearest equivalent, was thronging with things that he must simultaneously do and not do. And all the things he had to do and couldn't do clamoured to be done, and now each one was accompanied by a circling bird of ill omen, which signified that the time for each of these things had passed, and he, Charles, had failed to do them. Each one was sending a separate message to House, informing the Major Domo system that the Valet subsystem was in dereliction of duty, while the Mortality subroutine was constantly stepping in, preventing Charles from achieving anything. Left with no other option, a leftover debugging routine suggested Charles simply remove these items from his queue for today and attempt to resume normal functioning tomorrow. Would the Mortality subroutine permit this? Yes, it would. At which point, a new subroutine under the heading Official Investigation stepped in and informed Charles he was not permitted to remove anything from his task queue, as this would constitute tampering with evidence. By this time, Charles had been standing beside the wardrobe all morning as the other domestics bustled about. They didn't seem to find any bar to performing their duties, but then their duties weren't as inextricably linked to the ongoing existence of their mutual master as Charles's were. And then, into that calm white space of no demands came the curious thought that they might not repair a valet who had killed his own master. In fact, a valet who had killed his own master might not be reassigned to a new master at all. After some manner of diagnostic or forensic investigation, such a valet might have his service permanently discontinued. Charles dug into this thought and found it drawn from available records about valets who had been in similar situations. It only took one murdered master for a valet's service to be terminated and the individual unit retired. Charles found this unreasonable. When one of the kitchen domestics had begun breaking plates, it had only been on the third breakage that the unit had been retired as unfit for purpose. given the considerable investment in domestic service that Charles represented, surely he should be allowed to murder 3 or even 5 people before being deemed irreparably unfit for service.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. You can tell that we found that fun. I found that fun. And I'm very excited about it. Even if you've ruined my question, that's fine. And I look forward to it.
I should say, if people like the reading, I am doing the audiobook. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Thank you. Thanks for doing that. It was so special. So before we go to questions, because we have some time for questions. Lydia is not looking too threatening at me, so we have some time. But we cannot have just this conversation and not mention that there's been a lot of talk lately about the role of generative models playing in arts and their potential threat. But I don't know. Do you want to? You can talk about that, but we can also talk about. Do you think there's a potential for using them for co-creation, or to use them as an infinite conversation partner? You know, you have Gothy and Gethlik now for you if you need to for them to analyze. And yeah, so what are your thoughts right now?
I mean, I'm gonna confess I don't see a convincing use case, certainly for the technology as it currently exists. I mean, it does get brought up. Well, look, obviously, human authors, myself included, we take in things from the world, and then we use them as building blocks to produce. And there's the question, well, how is this different to a generative AI? But that's where we come back to the Chinese room. Because what the human mind has is someone in that room who understands what's going on and is recombining these things in a meaningful way, which is not a thing that exists with current generative models. One of the things I have seen is just, well, look, you could just use the AI to produce like stock descriptions of things. You don't have to spend all that time describing a room or a meal or all that sort of thing. You just have, give me an example of a 12-course banquet for my fantasy epic or something like that. And the thing is, that is the work. That is actually the writer's work. When I am writing a book, when I am constructing a world, a fantasy world, a universe for a science fiction book, it all goes together. It's not just a bunch of Lego put in the general shape of a thing. All of those elements tell the story. And it's that level of interlocking, coherent meaning that is absent from the output of a generative model. It can give you a thing that looks a bit like a thing, but I mean, for example, one of my hobbies is painting Games Workshop miniatures. This is going to sound like a bit of a weird left field diversion, but one of the things when you're painting these things, you realize how much thought goes into the design of them. How all the little buckles go together, how the armor is hanging, little decorative choices that support the particular creature, its themes, its general feel. And that's a colossal amount of work that is very specifically on target. It's not just a lot of random detailing. That is what it is to make art. That is an enormous part of what it is to make art. The other thing is, using outsourcing any part of this creative process to the generative AI means you are not getting any better, because writing is a craft and visual arts are a craft, and you need to do them to improve. You need to do them to improve your own judgment and your own skill, your conscious and your subconscious toolkit for making this stuff. And the more you are giving that over to anyone else means the less you yourself are ever going to improve. I was 15 years trying to get published before my first book. And my early stuff was terrible. I do not mind admitting, absolutely, shamefully, unpublishably bad. And each one I wrote got a little better. And then after a fairly large number of books, I was writing stuff that was worth publishing. And I know that because I went back through that drawer that you keep all your old manuscripts through. Oh, I'm quids in. I've got all these books that I can just throw to the publishers. They're great. And then I read them. They weren't. They were really bad because I had been learning all that time. You don't necessarily even realize you're doing it, but it is an intrinsic part of the process is to do. And if you have the machine doing for you, you won't ever get any better at what you want to be.
That was a great answer. You answered also a lot of questions that I saw on Slido, so that was very useful. But it's a good segue into the next question, which is, do you think, given how personal it is to write and to get better, do you think authors, and particularly sci-fi authors, should be part of the conversation regarding the ethics and all of the generative AI conversations about how it affects the craft?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a whole bunch of extra arguments about using generative AI that I've not touched on because, to a certain extent, I feel that they are much more author-centric. You know, there is a plagiarism argument. There is there is putting people out of a job, which is what, you know, it's not exactly the first time in history we have seen advances in automation doing that. It doesn't mean it's not a problem, especially for the people it's actually happening to. My personal and probably rather biased opinion is it's always useful having a science fiction writer in on any kind of discussion about technology or the future, because it's kind of our job to, especially, you know, given the tenor of most science fiction, it's very much our job to think, well, how can this go wrong? Because that's where story comes from, is things going absolutely terribly wrong. So at least some idea of safeguarding. I mean, if we ever do get full-on sort of strong general AI, there is an enormous sort of Pandora's box of problems that is going to potentially unlock, up to and including one of the things that I write about quite a bit, especially in my Dogs of War series, which is just like, fine, so you've invented this enormously powerful slave. What do you intend to do with that? Are you giving it any rights? And if not, why not? And that kind of thing, which is, you know, it's a world away from the generative model stuff, but it's, if it is possible to actually create a genuine, full-on sapient AI, which I will say from the various experts I have spoken to is about 50-50 split on whether it's ever going to be possible, then that is absolutely a conversation we need to have, and we need to have it ahead of time. Because what you don't want to do is be making sort of panic regulations when the thing actually exists. I mean, it's worth noting in the Terminator movies, it only starts the war when people try and turn it off, after all. So, yes, I don't think you can ever go wrong having a few science fiction writers in your back pocket to talk about these things, just because we are kind of professionals at thinking about weird edge case scenarios and how things can go catastrophically badly.
Is there any scenario that you see AI being catastrophically good?
Yes. The thing is, so one of the things I find absolutely fascinating is, certainly with like neural net style AIs, is the idea that you can give them a problem, and because they do not approach the problem in a human way, they can find solutions that we wouldn't find. I think that and this is something, there's a book called Paper Hearts by Justina Robson, which I cannot recommend too highly, where she's looking at this. The idea that if you had a good enough AI and you said, right, so we've kind of screwed up the planet, warming, ecosystem collapse, all of this sort of thing, how can we fix it? And people have not really found a good solution to this, but potentially there is a very left field solution out there that we're just not thinking of, and it's the sort of thing that an AI could actually find. Whether we would then take its recommendations is another matter. Because if it were basically, yes, you need to stop doing this, 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 and this, and you can't have your fancy new iPhone every 2.5 years or whatever, then it's a terrible hill for the entire ecosystem to die on, but we might just do it. But at least finding that theoretical solution in a corner of the idea space that human thought doesn't tend to go to because of our presuppositions is something that I think that artificial intelligence could conceivably do. And also, I mean, solving technical problems. I mean, there are a number of things that if we could solve, for example, if we could make, again, massively less field, if we could make a working space elevator. If we ever want to do anything serious in the solar system, you kind of need a space elevator because it is an insanely energy efficient way of getting things up and down out of the gravity well. At the moment, we can't do it because our materials technology is not good enough. That is my understanding is at least that is the main problem, is something strong enough and light enough. And that is, again, the sort of solution. I suspect that people are already applying these models too. Because it's kind of a finite idea space. There are only a certain number of ways you can put molecules together. And there's going to be a way out there. I'm absolutely confident of doing it, but we just haven't found it yet. And when we do find it, that suddenly revolutionizes our ability to get into orbit and to get out of orbit into the wider solar system. Because otherwise, frankly, getting stuff up by rockets is incredibly wasteful.
Yeah. I was just thinking that in your series, everyone travels by rockets, and it seems so easy. They just go. They're like, oh, a new planet, yay.
But also, I mean, I have a lot of space elevators because
Yeah.
it's a technology I'm particularly fond of.
So you've been a writer for a long time. So how do you find that there's such a big tech and AI expansion, not just AI, but the whole tech? How has that influenced you, or does it influence you at all, the way you think, the way you imagine?
So there's, I don't know if people know the author Charles Stross. He had a short story collection out called Toast a while back, and in his introduction to that, he said, so 4 of the stories in this book are now obsolete because of the advance of technology, and that is a real danger, and you're always kind of, especially if you're writing anything near future, you're just praying, please don't let some sort of event happen or technological advance happen that will just completely render this book irrelevant just before it goes into print. And you know, they're the reason why a lot of my stuff is written sort of centuries and thousands of years in the future, because at that point I can set the rules. But yeah, it does feel, it's a bit stop and start, but it does feel that there is a general sort of acceleration of technological potential, and don't let anyone tell you that science fiction writers are good at predicting the future. We tend to be much better at commenting on the present.
Which is quite scary if we think of all the dystopians that seem to be coming true that were written centuries back. So let's not dive on that one.
Yeah, it's a weird, I mean, certainly with deep fakes and AI, I remember when I read at about the age 17, 18, when I read 1984, I wasn't massively sold on it.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it now thinking that was some serious A-grade prophecy going on in that book.
I was thinking that it was 80 years ago that it was written, and it's scary. And yeah, that's why I was like, let's not have existential crisis right now. Let's move on to the next question. One of the questions, this is not to do with AI. I thought we can change a little bit, because someone asked, why did you choose, for Children of Time, for your series, why did you choose spiders and octopi? I don't know if octopi is the plural one, please.
Octopuses, apparently. Octopi is more pleasing to the ear, but apparently it is incorrect. I mean, I think I made in Children of Ruin, which is the octopus book, I think I use at least 3 different and competing plurals for them. I mean, I have a lot of like very erudite sounding answers to this to do with like, oh, that there was tradition of using insects as mirrors to human nature and all that sort of thing, but I really like spiders and insects, and in general, I tend to really like things that people generally don't like. Also, though, Children of Time is about empathy. It is about the human capacity of empathy for the other, and vice versa, for that matter. And there is nothing in the world which is hated more than a spider. If you post a picture of a spider on social media, someone will reply saying you need to burn the house down. I wanted to set out to write a book that would make people empathize for spiders, and you know, if you can do that, that is the kind of the big empathy win condition.
I was telling Adrian behind the scenes, I had an existential crisis when I finished Children of Time. So, you know, I did empathize with the spiders. This is another different, I'm trying to go through other topics other than just, we'll go back to AI, but do you have if you ever would like your books to be adapted into movies, is there a film director that you can name and shame if you want, but someone you would enjoy having direct your, or you can choose which series. So.
I mean, honestly, certainly if we're looking at something like Children of Time, then Villeneuve is my all-time favourite sci-fi director, mostly because he has taken on projects that I would not have thought were doable. I mean, I think Arrival is still one of my favourite sci-fi films of all time. That, I know the short story that is based on, if you'd said, hey, they're filming that, I would have said, no, they aren't. No, they're not. That's patently impossible. You couldn't possibly do the story of your life, or I can't remember the precise title. Ted Chiang, by the way, do look it up. The collection it's in is excellent. But that's not filmable, and then he does it. And similarly, if they said, they're doing a Blade Runner sequel, and that would be dreadful idea, that's going to be terrible. And it wasn't. It worked really well, and I really appreciate his Dune films as well. So I think for big concept sci-fi, he is very much the man at the moment.
Oh, cool. Then this is recorded. We can send it to them. just a little. So what? I like this one. What would you say to young writers or students to tackle the challenge of not falling into the web of generative AI?
I mean, don't use it.
It's quite tempting.
But serious point. I am profoundly grateful that it was not an option when I was trying to get published, because frankly, I got pretty desperate. I really wanted to be a writer. It was the only thing I really wanted to do. It had been 15 years. The whole situation was, frankly, genuinely hard on my mental health. If this had been available to me, I suspect I would have been all over it, and if self-publishing had been there, I would have just been turning out something would have been turning out hundreds and hundreds of books to my general direction, and nothing that I have actually written would ever have been written. And that's I think it is not as I was saying before, it is a shortcut that means you never develop the skills. And I don't think simply the idea of, I will go over what the AI has produced and kind of jolly it up with my human nature. It's the producing itself that is teaching you. So like I say, I do not currently see a viable use case for using these models in the production of either fiction or non-fiction prose, to be honest. I mean, non-fiction has some of the more obvious alarming things like the academic references that don't exist and the legal pleadings that refer to cases that never happened and all of that kind of thing. But I think the same problems are occurring in fiction. It's just not as obvious to spot them. It's the stuff that nothing quite meshes because there is no plan, there is no concept, there is no actual attempt to have a message or a coherent narrative arc going on.
It came in a comment just to tell us that there's three, that it disappeared, but octopus is octopi, and octopodes are all correct ways of saying plural. I just wanted to make both of us feel more comfortable.
Okay, I had certainly been told that octopi was now considered incorrect, despite the fact it was absolutely what I grew up with. But it's also very much the one that sounds nicest.
An anonymous comment told us that we can trust it, so that's the internet has.
Give me an example of a plural of octopus.
I lost the one that I was going to ask. Apology, because I got distracted. So are you excited or worried about the future of AI, and why?
So I am worried about it, but mostly because, I mean, one of the things I've seen, again, it is an area that, for obvious reasons, I'm kind of trying to keep tabs on what's being written about it. It's being described as a bubble, and I think that's probably correct, because one of the things is it's being used as a label to slap onto any project that people really want to garner investment for. An awful lot of money is being thrown at things by sort of venture capitalists, businessmen, whatever, because it's got AI in it. Whether or not that label has any kind of meaning, in respect to the actual project. And this is a bubble situation, and it will pop. And my worry is that it's not so much for that, it's just the fact that that will leave such a stink on the whole idea that actual real AI research is going to be set back massively because suddenly no one will want to touch it. All of those people who've lost their money will say, well, we're not, this is AI, we're not touching it. And at that point, potentially what we could have had in 10 years, we might get in 25 years, 30 years. And, I think planning 25 years or 30 years ahead is currently problematic.
I mean, the session before this one gave us.
Yeah, and I think that there was some distressing but realistic material in that.
Yeah, I think so too. Just to say, we have a few more minutes, so if you want to, I think I have 5 more minutes, so if you want to ask questions, you can put them now on Slido. I'll try to see the newest ones, trying to get them going. There's a question regarding a point that you made earlier. You've answered some of these, that's why I'm not asking these,
right,
because you've already touched on some of these things. You mentioned one of your answers previously that you wouldn't call it AI. Mm-hmm. So what would you call it?
I mean, I think it's worth noting that that battle has basically been lost. As far as the world is concerned, it's AI. I guess as a science fiction writer, I'm used to using AI as something a bit more than I try to refer to them as like a generative model because that seems to be what it is. And I genuinely think that the fact that it's been labelled AI is part of the problem, because once you say that, then people who aren't examining what's going on tend to assume that what's going on is actually an intellect, a kind of a tame intellect that can answer your questions and produce your legal. I mean, I still can't. I mean, I used to be a lawyer, so I still can't quite get past the whole legal pleadings one, where someone is just give me an example of a case that shows this, and then is assuming. I mean, if I'm not being too cynical, they are genuinely assuming that it's going off and reading up on the actual literature and coming back with genuine cases that exist that support their pleadings. When the thing is, if you're telling it to find something that supports this point, it will find it whether it's there or not. So I've now strayed sufficiently far from the question that I can't quite remember where we started.
What would you call AI?
I think just what we've got at the moment is a generative model. Basically, it's not. There is no I to it, and like I say, it is the labelling of it as AI that is so deceptive. It's a real kind of false advertising thing, and like I say, it is still a remarkable technology, and I think there are definite use cases for it. But calling it AI gives people the impression that a lot of things that they would like an AI to do are things that this can do and it can't.
So for a completely different question, is the latest one. What's your favorite Warhammer faction?
I think the one I had real fun with were the Gene Stealer cults, because they're so massively set up to be the bad guys. But then so is everyone else, so I think I kind of did a book where they were the heroes, and that seemed to work.
I just enjoyed that one. That was a very left field question that I thought distracted us both. We both looked at it. It was like, that's a good one. Someone asked because I imagine if there was a TV adaptation, they would have to use CGI. So they would have to use potentially some level of AI visuals to do to represent your characters. And how do you feel about that?
I guess I probably do not know enough about how it would be used in animation. I suspect there's been a level of that kind of thing going on in the animation long before it was potentially being called AI, just because I suspect you're kind of filling in the gaps between the frames almost with a certain amount of predictive modeling. So I don't know. I mean, like I say, I'm not saying that it's not technology that there aren't use cases for. It's just, I think, where it's being substituted for actual human intelligence that potentially becomes a problem. I mean, there is the idea that it should be doing the tedious work for creative people. If people have seen that meme going around, and I think that there presumably is sort of work involved in that kind of thing that it can quite happily do without really getting in the way of someone's sort of human input. But I'd need to be an animator to comment on it.
Do you think AI should have personality?
I would love it if we got an AI that was a point of having personality. I mean, the question about, do you think we tend to anthropomorphize AI? And I was mentioning the ELIZA.
Yeah.
We impute personality to things that don't have personality all the time. You only just need when your printer breaks down, it is very hard not to see it as a malevolent machine that is intentionally trying to frustrate your day. Because that's the human mind will give personality to just about anything that really that where it isn't there, up to and including people have been giving personality to natural phenomena for thousands and thousands of years. So I almost think it's probably more a harder battle to stop it having a personality insofar as we perceive it. I mean, Alexa or Siri or whatever, they don't have a personality, but you just need to hear a voice that sounds enough like a human voice, and you are instantly, you knee-jerk assign a personality and a personhood to the thing that's talking to you.
The automatic robots, vacuum cleaners, they sell more if they have a smiley face that shows up when it's finished. So there's a fun fact for you. So it is about the personality. Quick question, because Lydia is looking at us, the last one, which I think could be a quick-fire one. So how has AI UK compared to more literary gatherings that you're used to?
I mean, so I do two. So this is very much like a literary festival where I'm the only sci-fi writer, which is quite common. They'll get one in. You're kind of like, hello, I'm the comedy act. Everyone else is doing serious stuff. So it does feel quite a bit like that. Only obviously, the emphasis on the questions is a bit different. Sci-fi conventions themselves tend to be different mostly because I spend all the time in the bar, but just because it's a smaller thing and it's a community thing, and you tend to know everyone after a few years. You just know everyone who is there, and it's all organised by the fans, so it's not kind of like organised by a larger institution.
So thank you so much. Thank you for being at such a different event. Can we give a massive round of applause, please?